everyone. My name is Jordan Strom, and I'm the curator of exhibitions and collections at the Surrey Art Gallery. Really excited that you were able to join us today for the Sentient Circuitries Symposium. I mean, this symposium is really going to address a couple key issues, and I'll let my co-convener sort of map out some of the coordinates in a moment. We are certainly going to be talking a little bit about interactivity and some of the discussions around and theorizations of interactivity and thinking about how it relates to our practices today, in the recent past, and potentially down the road. I want to, before we kind of get into some of the ideas and some of our guest speakers, we've got a full roster today. I want to acknowledge that we are on the unceded traditional territories as uninvited guests of the Coast Salish peoples, including, not least of which, the Quamin, the Sammy, and the Katsi peoples here in Surrey, and this site in particular, the Surrey Art Gallery in Dorothy Park. As some of you noted, this year's symposium is a little bit different, sort of slightly different than what we've been doing in the last number of years. I know many of you have been at symposiums in the past, which have focused more on sound and audio culture and sound art. This edition is that, but it's also more, I think, inclusive of visual and other sensory practices, but sound and themes of sound art and sound art practices will certainly be a part of what we will continue to talk about in our annual fall symposium. So I'm really excited about that. And why is this, you might ask? Is you've probably already gathered, if you've been across the hall and across the foyer, is that we are celebrating our 20th anniversary of our TechLab program. And the exhibition, Garden in the Machine, is 6 artists from across Canada who are featured, a couple of whom are here today, in our exhibition space throughout the fall until mid-December. So hopefully you have a chance, if you don't get a chance to experience it fully today, to come back and spend some time with it. I should say that the VR room is open, and we have a facilitator there to walk you through and guide you in the VR work, Unceded Territories by Lawrence Paul Yechwalupton and Paisley Smith. And I should also say that this symposium will sort of have this larger framework going forward, and we've got some really exciting additions planned for the next couple of years, so we'll maybe share a little bit about that later. I also mentioned in terms of today that we've got a book launch at the end of this event and a little reception, so hopefully you can stick around between 4 and 4:30 and before you head off for your evening plans. We're going to be celebrating the launch of a new catalog on our Surrey Urban Screen program, which is a sort of part of our TechLab program. We've got food and beverage at the back. Help yourselves throughout the afternoon. We've got the washrooms down the hall to the right. And I want to now shift to introducing our other convener, my esteemed co-host, Brady Marks. Brady Ciel Marks is a computational artist concerned with entanglement in technology. She creates kinetic and audiovisual works that demystify, transgress in, and reinterpret our relationships with technology. She holds a Master's of Science in Interactive Arts from Simon Fraser University and a Bachelor of Science Honors in Computer Science from the University of Cape Town, South Africa. Her projects have toured internationally. She's presented artist talks in Illuminato Festival in Toronto, the Migros Museum für Gegenkunstwerk in Zurich, and the Emily Carr University of Art and Design, not too far from here. I'll just mention she hosts Soundscape Cut and Run podcast as a member of the Vancouver Electronic Ensemble. Please welcome Brady.
Thank you. Thank you all. Sorry, Jordan, I didn't mean to rush you, but I did notice the time, and I was given strict instructions to stay on time. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be done already. So I'm not. But thank you for that introduction. I am super excited to be here today and to hear the panelists talk and the keynote that's coming up. So But before we get to the meat and potatoes, I've been asked to give you a little bit of a background and introduction. And I don't know, for myself, as many practitioners in this field, I entered from the side, and I did not have a classical visual art education. So I learned a whole bunch of stuff preparing, which I'm going to share with you. So what I'd like to do is open the right document, right? Give you a brief orientation to interactive art. Today, what we once called new media art is not new, but another medium like painting or ceramics. We have seen, since new media art, we've seen movements such as relational aesthetics and social practices follow interactive art. And also a movement away from disciplinary titles. Many artists describe themselves as interdisciplinary, even transdisciplinary. And so for the last 2 decades or so, artists working in this field and others have become largely medium agnostic. The term interactive art has its origins in the 50s and 60s. However, we could more easily contextualize this work in the cultural historical context of play, and therefore go much further back. For me, Eric Zimmerman and Katie Kalin, in their work, I think it's called On Play. I don't have my reference here. But they describe play as free movement within a more rigid structure. And the visual image that they give us with this is the description of the play in the steering wheel of an old automobile, which I really love. We often say, oh, there's a lot of play here. And I think that is integral. They have given us 4 layers of interactivity, and this is interactivity in the broadest sense. And later on, I'm going to narrow it down to the sense that we're talking about today, interactive art with digital media. So the 4 layers are: 1, the interpretive dimension. This is hermeneutics. The idea that one could read a book or encounter a work at one stage in one's life and then revisit it many years later and have a very different interpretation. The second dimension or layer is utilitarian interaction. This, you might think here of the idea of whether a book has an index or a table of contents, ways that one enters and leaves a work. For example, the spatial arrangement of the gallery that was not anticipated by the artist or the artwork. Any selection of framing that runs parallel to the work in of itself. And thirdly, the part that we emphasize the most, design choices, overt participation. In the beginning, this was often clicking and selecting, but it might also be following the rules of the game in an interactive work or process such as Exquisite Corpse, which is a drawing exercise that follows rules and it produces a picture. And lastly, the macroscopic interaction. This is cultural interaction where different groups take the work and interact with it by extending it. We can think of spin-off works, remixes, fan art, fan fiction, the recent phenomenon online of shipping characters where people create relationships between, for example, Disney princesses that wasn't overtly referenced in the original, for example, in Frozen. So remixing and also cosplay. So we can see how interaction can be at many different levels with these 4 layers. Zimmerman and Ciel also give us 2 other multiplying attributes that we can use as a taxonomy of interactive works. The distinction of whether a work has embedded structure or emergent structure. And by embedded structure, that means that there's fixed content in the work, for example, text or images in a database or library, which is navigated by the rules of interaction. Emergent structure comes back to this idea of the exquisite corpse, where there's no image or no text in the work, but rather it is generated by the process outside of the work. So for the purposes of today's discussion, we'll be largely focusing on the intersection of digital media and interactive art in that broader sense. So how did we come to understand this term of interactive art as we do today? Interaction was initially used to describe the reciprocal action in biological, chemical, and physiological processes from 1909 onward. I'm leaning on the history described by Katja Kwastek in their book, Aesthetics of Interaction in Digital Art. And they describe two major bifurcation points from this initial 1909 description. Artwork based on this conceptual ground of interaction developed mostly in the 50s and 60s and largely in Europe, and it employed initially analog electronics. These works were not termed interactive, though they were, by our current understanding, definitely interactive artworks. They were often called cybernetic, responsive, or reactive artworks. After this, so that first bifurcation is that the word interactive was taken up by theories to describe theories of social exchange in sociology, psychology, and communication studies. So that there's the word interaction is in that world, but then you have this bifurcation point where artists started to use it, and particularly Neuberg's cybernetics, the art which comes from a Greek term which literally means art of the helmsman. This conceptualization of cybernetics was characterized by feedback processes as a basis of life and technology. So if we think of feedback processes as being in base of life and technology, these very different things, and if that is some kind of union or some kind of fundamental process, then we can understand how we use the word cybernetic in cyborg, where there's a merger of technology and life forms, typically human, because at base there is similar processes acting, and we could envisage a system where they communicate or hybrid forms might exist. So the work that came out of that, as I said, was called cybernetic, responsive, and reactive, and was mostly in Europe during the 50s and 60s. After this phase, according to Kwasek, cybernetic art fell into a rut with a surrounding disillusionment, and commenters lamenting, that's the word, that a lack of a new viable form had not emerged, decrying, in fact, the bungling of cybernetics art potential, even up till the 80s. Who knew? Our second bifurcation point comes along after the development of the field of human-computer interaction, or HCI, which you see the word interaction being used. So HCI is another field that we're not going to look at, but that's a bifurcation point that stimulated interactive art. So in 63, Sutherland's Sketchpad was essentially the first computer drawing tool, and Engelbart's XY position indicator in 65 was the first mouse. So for artists, computer technology was used to control and formulate these cybernetic feedback systems. This invigorated cybernetic art and its production, particularly in the US. In 1969, the first terms was the first appearance of the term interactive art. It was first used by artists and scientists working at the University of Wisconsin in an installation called Glow Flow. It was described as such: Glow Flow is not an exhibition in the traditional sense, but a continuous experiment in interactive art. At this stage, we can list three fundamental features of interactive art: the real-time exchange between and the presence of non-human actors or agents, control and feedback systems, and the selection of interpretation processes. The selection and interpretation processes in the work. So those will be our three at that point. Okay, I have 1 minute. Thank you. That's perfect. So for me, the defining artwork that I encountered in my path here was the 9 evenings performances in New York. And I think why that is defining for interactive art is that it sits at the bridge of all these different forces I've just outlined. It was before the term interactive art was developed. It was essentially cybernetic works, but it came out of this participatory framework of those initial ideas of interaction. That participatory framework was really imbued and drenched with the fluxus sensibility. And lastly, it had this balance between art and technology, where 30 engineers supported 10 artists to create those 9 evenings. And if you're interested in exploring further, I would definitely check out the Langlois Foundation's documentation of the 9 evenings performances. Thank you. Okay, so I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Beryl Graham, who's here today helping us in a number of events, particularly envisioning the new Surrey Art Gallery's presence in an interactive art museum. Beryl Graham is an artist, curator, writer, and educator with special interests in curating and new media art. She is the research professor at the University of Sutherland in the northeast of England and the co-founder and co-editor of the website Crum, curatorial resource for upstart media bliss. The wonderful title, and I think she has the best sticker on her laptop, if you've seen that. In addition to many journal articles, magazine pieces, and chapters from edited anthologies, Beryl is the authors of several books, including Digital Media, Directions in Art, and co-author with Sarah Cook of Rethinking Curating After New Media, MIT Press. She has lectured internationally, and in 96 to 97, she curated the seminal exhibition Serious Games at the Lane Art Gallery in Newcastle, and I guess a tour to the Barbican in London. Fantastic. Good work. Thank you. Please welcome Beryl.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I feel as though I've been doing this an awfully long time. Crum is famous for having been established around the turn of the century, and looking back over the past 20 years of the Surrey Art Gallery. It's been really very interesting for me also to reflect on the past, because one of the curators that we interviewed in 2004 was Leanne Davison, the then curator of the gallery. And we talked about many interesting things, and it's been interesting for me to reflect on how little has changed in 20 years, and also how much has changed in the general kind of art world in relation to the work formerly known as new media art. Sunderland is in the northeast of the country, and it's interesting that this map on the right-hand side is a map of where the creative economy is in the UK. And as you can see, Sunderland is not in the heart of this growing sort of burgeoning creative economy in the UK. It's really settled in on the hips of the country in the southeast. The book, Rethinking Curating, covered many different subjects. This is a text analysis of the book about curating in particular, and we're very glad to see that art was still at the centre of this, because I'm clearly too old to have been born digital, or to be a digital native. So really, Sarah's background in curating was very much contemporary art, and my own background was photography. So we're aiming to talk about a number of issues like participation, about curating, and about production as well as exhibiting or dissemination. And I'm going to start with just 3 examples of curating, which hopefully are going to be quite relevant to the context of the Surrey Art Gallery. The Harrods Museum in Preston is also in the north of the country, in quite a economically poor town. It's a medium-sized, council-funded museum with a collection which includes, 18th century silverware, as well as, because of the curator Lindsay Taylor, over many years, at least 20 years, has built up an audience for digital and new media art, some of which is quite challenging work. This was an exhibition that they did as part of the current project, and it included 7 artworks, including this by Yoha, which concerns the coltan wars, coltan being the mineral which feeds mobile phone production. They had an exhibition of 7 works, and very unusually for an art museum, they involved the audience in voting for which of those works would end up in the collection of the museum. They had a panel of experts choosing and also asked the public. And interestingly, both the experts and the public chose this work by Thomson and Craighead, a very conceptual work, which is a series of numbers which are about the distance travelled through the universe in 1 year. And on the other wall, the number projected is the number of barrels of oil remaining in the world. A very conceptual work, and this was one that both sides voted for. So if you are having the public interacting in your collecting, it could be argued to be the heart of a museum, then you've got to be able to trust your audience and trust that you've been able to build up an informed and enthusiastic audience for this kind of work. The second example is from Birmingham, in the middle of the country, quite a small gallery called Vivid, and they re-imaged the work of sadly a late artist called Donald Rodney. He did a very wide range of works, some of which were well preserved and some of which weren't at all well preserved. So these works are not in the collection of Vivid, but they re-imaged the history of his work to try and fit the nature of the work by the artist. So some of them are film, some of them are video. They involved lots of different people in the production of this exhibition. There's a very long list of credits involved. So some of his media that he used were very unusual. This is actually his own wheelchair, and which is now an interactive artwork. The wheelchair follows people around the gallery space, and people can interact with the wheelchair, and all the workings of how that works are revealed publicly as well. So this was a kind of work where it took a lot of different people working on it to get it reworking or re-imaged so that it functioned according to the intent of the artist. The third example is purely online. This is one of my former PhD students, Maria Laura Ghedini, who, through her experience as a curator online and offline, decided to do this exhibition, which uses the proprietary platform of eBay. eBay is interestingly quite a distributed, or rather a decentralized model, so that each country will have its own eBay. This is ebay.in, India. And these the two lead curators selected a range of other international curators to select artworks as part of this exhibition. This particular piece, the artist was actually selling the work, as is appropriate, on the eBay platform. And they used the platform pretty straight. They used to use the affordances of it, for example, the fact that people can ask questions about these products, and also that each country has to abide by the commercial selling laws of that country. So, for example, this artist was very keen to describe this work, which is a hand-drawn portrait done via Skype. You can see that the entire screen there has been drawn out. And the work is described as being new with defects, truth to advertising, and also there was a warning saying that the work was unsuitable for those who would like to buy a realistic depiction. So what does it mean when we're using multinational network proprietary platforms as an exhibition space? You know, can this exhibition work purely online? And how does that then change the nature of the exhibiting and the nature of the artwork selected itself? So, what do we mean by new media art? And we are still using new media art because as being slightly different from the digital, because it's not just about digital versions of analog media, such as, you know, it's not necessarily about digital photography and the ways that is different. We have taken Steve Dietz's 3 categorizations of net art and applied it to new media art in general. So we look upon this kind of work as being stuff that has these 3 characteristics, which are more like behaviors of the work than traditional media-based art historical categories. So the first one, connectivity. Here's the lovely Marcel Duchamp playing chess with John Cage and connecting through physical wires to sound generators, which make an audio work. Things connect to other things, and this can be live, or very much connected to the history of curating live art, which I know some of the later speakers have expertise in. This is one work which was on the River Tyne. It was a water wheel which collected data about the flow in the River Tyne, and then members of the public could use that data and transform it into a sound work. So they could interact with knobs and dials and both play with that data and make their own audio works from it. Things connect to other things, therefore. Computability is the characteristic which is probably least familiar to general art historians. But the nature of software, any algorithm, means that it can evolve. In this case, the piece learnt about movements of gerbils. I guess you probably wouldn't be allowed to exhibit this these days, but it was okay in the 70s. So the software learned about the movements of the gerbils, and then robot arms moved the blocks around in response to the movement of the gerbils. Or this more recent piece by Sneha Solanki, where a computer virus evolves. It's set off, in this case, the poem on the screen is the Robert Burns poem, My Love is Like a Red, Red Rose, and the virus being connected by a wire between the computers slowly eats away at the poem so that the text of the poem becomes corrupted. So the software evolves, it learns, and therefore this brings up a very interesting question of authorship for curators about the artist would do the original software but not be completely in control of what happens with the evolution of that software. And the third category of interactivity, which we're talking about mostly today. In this case, the interactivity here is denoted in this lovely modernist photograph by the beanbags on the floor. Many curators would rather eat one whole than have a beanbag in their exhibition gallery. But it does get over this idea that the audience might actually talk to each other as well as being in solitary contemplation of the artwork. Way back in the last century, I curated the show Serious Games, which has been mentioned. appropriately to the time, quite a lot of the artworks were very simple in their technical level of interaction. This is a single screen, interactive CD-ROM, as it was at the time, where the viewers pointed and clicked on the screen. But if you have artists who are very aware of what kind of difference that makes to the viewer, the artist in this case worked with residents in a high-security mental hospital in the UK, and most of whom were there because they self-harmed rather than being a harm to other people. Many of them had scars, so in pressing their bodies against a scanner, the patients were then able to record the scars and then tell the stories behind the scars. So far from being like a very point-and-click madness, kind of, very low level of interaction, the viewer was put in a place of responsibility. So did they actually want to probe those wounds? Did they want to hear those stories? So pointing and clicking became a very different way of reading, which is obviously, of very large theoretical importance, although very technically simple kinds of interaction. So in this work, Pulse Room is by the artist Rafael Larzano-Hema. The individual interaction is fairly simple. You hold on to metal bars, it measures your heartbeat, and the first light bulb starts to pulse in reaction to your heartbeat. And it's actually quite easy to recognize your own heartbeat, very strangely. When the next person comes up, your heartbeat moves as part of this larger grid of heartbeats. So you can watch it, you can follow your heartbeat along. So the next person pushes your heartbeat one light bulb along the work. But as it's portrayed here, if you have several people in the room at the same time, what you gradually realize is that your delicate heartbeat is actually, if there's enough other people who have that reaction, then your own heartbeat will be pushed off the end of the grid. So the difference between individual kind of reaction to a piece of software, where you get good sort of feedback in that you have your amplification of your own interaction, is also tempered by this idea that you are part of a group. What happens to your heartbeat if the group is large enough to push you off the end of the grid? And the artist has said that successful pieces that feature interactivity for groups are usually out of control. So that's out of control of the artist, because you don't know how people are going to behave, and also out of control of the curator, which a lot of curators find quite challenging. And is the interaction happening very simply between the programmed artwork and the individual user, or is the biggest part of the interaction happening between people within this interactional network? Another piece where this also comes into play is, oh, blimey. Sorry, my cursor is only on the projection, which makes it very, okay. This piece has texts by undocumented workers around San Jose, so invisible texts and voices. You can only see this red text because it's infrared. You can only see it through a recording device like a phone. So the guy at the front is looking very puzzled because he can't see anything. But what tends to happen is that people end up explaining it to each other. And even in San Jose, in a public place, people were lending each other their mobile phones, which is a very transgressive thing to do, a very generous thing to do, because of this desire to have interaction between people and to help other people see what they are seeing, these, especially as these are invisible voices for the most part. So do we mean interaction? Do we mean reaction, as Brady was saying, a simple reaction? Do we mean interaction, where things are acting upon each other? Do we mean participation, where people are taking a bigger part in something? Or do we mean collaboration, where it's a much closer or more horizontal relationship between the people who are involved in, perhaps it might be collaboratively producing a work, but not in the exhibition phase of the work? What do we mean? And you've probably seen these network diagrams a million times, but if you consider the nodes as being people rather than computers, then it becomes interesting to try and map who is interacting with who or what in any given artwork. Is it like a centralized broadcast model, or is it something more distributed? Although a distributed model is really very difficult to achieve. The artist who might be described as doing community art in some ways, Chien van Heeswijk, the Dutch artist, has done many community-based projects involving local residents in, for example, setting up a bread baking business in Liverpool, or here having a sporting boxing, like a formal competition in public places. At a certain point in her career, she decided to map all the people that had been involved in her projects and in what way through a relational database. So you might recognize this network model. What she decided to do was to represent this network model by representing different kinds of people with different kinds of potatoes. So she does recognize herself as the center of these networks. So she's the big sweet potato in the middle. Curators are represented by the mentor variety of potato. Also, they grow a lot of potatoes in the Netherlands, so it seemed sensible to her. And then when this work was exhibited in a public place, it was quite a sort of a damp, small basement gallery, and the potatoes started to sprout and grow their own relationships between them. So when you have artists sort of really investigating those network models for how they work in real life, I find that very useful. Although a lot of the rhetoric of any museum these days, I'm sure you might be familiar with a lot of hype about interactivity in the 90s, where really museums were under huge pressure to make everything interactive, which isn't necessarily the best way of going about things. You don't have to interact all of the time, and also to have an open system in some way. The system's in the title of this symposium. So, do we have an open system? How open is it? Do we mean open systems? Do we mean open data? Do we mean open source? This was a project by Yoha Artist Group again. And there is a rhetoric of open data in government, that all governments, as local governments in the UK, are supposed to open up their expenditure data to the public. And they do that. But as the artist said, they had to look at 23,000 lines of code in order to investigate this data, which really no member of the public is likely to do. So they translated this code into these pneumatic machines. So this bicycle seat jerks up and down depending on expenditure levels of the council. This is Bristol Lord Mayor sitting on the bicycle seat and getting jerked up and down. And what the artists decided to also do is to make it open source, so that they shared the instructions for making these machines, both the physical machines and the software behind the translation from data to pneumatic machines. They also made a book stabbing machine if the expenditure on libraries went below a certain level. A large kitchen knife would stab a book. So, what do we mean by vocabularies of interaction, levels of interaction? What do curators need to know? And what difference does this make for curating? So, does it simply mean that new media is included in the general cabinet of curiosities of museums? In this case, there's a screen as well as objects from anthropological museums and contemporary art in the same case. If it's about audience interaction, then what happens when artists can deliberately challenge the nature of of audience interaction and try and make it difficult for the audience? What does that mean for curating? And what does it mean when members of the public might actually be involved in participating in curating, which is a very challenging thing for many curators. This is the DIY day at MoMA, where a network of artists decided to have a certain day where they would turn up with their augmented reality artworks and add them to the existing MoMA exhibitions. Quite respectfully, it has to be said, they worked around the existing artworks and they very helpfully added an extra floor to MoMA in AR so that MoMA could show more works from its own collection, which MoMA very helpfully makes available on their website. And they decided to curate an exhibition from this collection, again, without permission of MoMA. And also, what does it mean when, for example, in this case, when school kids get involved in inventing things? This is a project in the northeast of England, working with Dominic Wilcox, who describes himself as an artist, but actually works across both art and design. He did a foundation course in art, in fine art, and then did a master's course in design. Describes himself as an artist still, but I think those boundaries are very much breaking down, which is very interesting for those kind of traditional hierarchies of fine art. And also, what does it mean if not only are people participating in ideas for inventions, then if they actually physically make those things, what does that mean if you have maker spaces? So the image in the middle here is a war avoidance glass dome. So Sunderland has particular glass-making skills historically. So this was actually physically made to quite a high level of craft skills, sort of working with the children, but with making experts. This is a multi-person family scooter in the left-hand side. And these were actually made because the Northeast still has a manufacturing industry. So they were selected and actually physically made, which made such a difference to the whole nature of this participatory project. The same curator, Susie O'Hara, a part of her research was to try and challenge the rhetoric of, there's a lot of talk about sort of cross-sector projects, so you have creative technologists working with artists, and historically in the past, a big problem was this because it was quite an unequal relationship in terms of the amount of money that the artist versus the technologist might get, and also the IP issues. So her research was very much about that, trying to challenge the sort of current idea that STEAM rather than STEM, so that's having art in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics projects, was kind of vaguely thought to be important, but nobody had really had a structure so that this could be a more equal relationship. And also curators in major art museums like SF MoMA had engaged in projects where technology was involved in lots of different ways, as it traditionally is in a museum. Quite often it's the people in the education department who know more about new media and who are experienced. So in this picture, some of this is educational technology, some of it is art technology, and some of it is website. At SF MoMA, they realized that there were many more roles involved if you were dealing with new media art, from marketing and communications, the conservators, from the curators and the director. Really many more people, systems people, were involved in this project compared to their other exhibitions, which makes a big difference to the kind of roles that curators play. So we run a series of different courses, including this professional development course, because we're really concerned that the next generation of curators are really able and equipped to deal with this range of different issues and behaviors and works. And we take them to production spaces, such as Machines Room, down in the left-hand side there, and also collecting spaces. This is the Victoria and Albert Museum print room collection area. We to go and visit curators at various organizations, trying to pick the most interesting things at that particular organisation, in this case Tate Collectives, which is the Tate's Young People's programme, who involve young people not only in art production but in art curating. This is a show curated by the Tate Collectives group, and they don't care what kind of media they use particularly. They selected works from the collection, from print, painting, photography, and also new media, including social media. The Victoria and Albert have recently collected items such as the 3D printed gun. Or rather, what they have collected is a huge stack of legal papers and a very small plastic object, which they have shown in their rapid response collecting area. This is the Open Data Institute, who show new media artworks all around their working office spaces. This is Ceiling Cat. We're all praying to Ceiling Cat on the professional development course. We're in the kitchen looking at the crisp dispenser machine, which is also an artwork by Ellie Harrison. And this is us under a knitted artwork about working hours connected to data and knitting machines. Further afield are a very small council-funded organisation who do a lot of production, workshops with all kinds of local communities. I have a very small gallery space in the middle of a park, a very well-used park, in Finsbury Park, and have done online and physical, collaboratively curated shows such as the DWO show on the bottom left, Do It With Others, not Do It Yourself, because you have more company that way. And my last slide is from really just a whole range of international people that have been on our Curators Professional Development course, which makes me very happy about the kind of future. I can look at these people and know that some of the projects which I've shown you, such as the eBay project, came out of this workshop and worked in a very international way with curators from Bahrain, from Poland, from India, and hopefully are carrying those skills, those tools together in a way which are going to equip them to deal with the ever-changing challenges of new media art, and especially in order so that curators can keep up with artists. Thank you.
Thank you, Beryl. That was amazing and covering a lot of ground. Appreciate that. And we're going to, as we discussed earlier, you're going to join the first panel's Q&A period. So it's a chance for people to ask you some questions and have a bit of conversation about some of the projects you talked about. So Brady, I'm going to hand it over to you to give a little context for the first panel.
And then you'll do the bios?
I'll do the bios, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, but I'm brimming with questions already. In this next panel, I've sort of side-titled it Biointeraction and the Off-Centering of the Technological. And what I mean to confront here is the relationship between technology and interactive art is both foreshadows and is shadowed by this thing I mentioned earlier called human-computer interaction. And there's an interesting development if you think about how this was first described. It was first human factors in computer science. That was one of the conferences. And then it became human-computer interaction, and then human-centered design, and then experience design, user experience design, and then experience design. So we've seen this trajectory of how humans have been off-centered and re-centered, and now I think off-centered again, and we're adjusting our privileges and our hierarchical relationships with respect to technology, the environment, and the Anthropocene. So I see that as a common thread in all the panelists' work, where they are rebalancing and rejigging these questions. This movement or rejigging reflects not only our more environmental concerns, but also directly opposes our mainstream fetishization of technology. My question to the panelists that we'll get into the discussion after they've presented is, can we look to an ever more radical off-centering of interactive art? Does human sensibility require a more urgent investment in an age of intelligent machines and pre-apocalyptic visions? So I hope that gives you a sense of where the possible interactions are between these panelists.
Thank you, Brady. So I want to introduce the first panelist for this first panel. Leila Sujir, there's Leila, is an artist, associate professor at Concordia University in an intermedia, including video, performance, electronic arts, where she is also chair of the Studio Arts Department. Over the last 30 years, Leila has built a body of video installation artworks using a mix of fiction, fantasy, and documentary with visual and audio collage techniques. She explores themes of migration, immigration, nationhood, culture. Her works have been shown in galleries and festivals around the world and are included in the collections of the National Gallery of Canada, the Glenbow Museum in Calgary, the University of Lethbridge Art Gallery, and numerous libraries and other collections as well, I should note. Her work is also featured in the Garden of the Machine exhibition across the foyer, a work called Forest Breath. So hopefully you have a chance to experience that work before the end of the day, or you can come back and experience it before the end of the exhibition. Please welcome Leila Sujir.
Thank you. So I'd first like to thank the conveners, Jordan and Brady, and I really enjoyed Beryl's talk. So here are some of the questions that I wanted to pose and what I have questions about. So in terms of archiving and memory, hardware and software archiving the work needed to keep media artworks available, remastering, archiving, and then we're talking about sentient circuitries, how to access our intelligence, and the relationship of technology to the military-industrial complex. What are the implications? And I ask that because some of the algorithms and the work that I've made depends on those systems. So this is a work from 2013 that I worked on with Maria Lantin. We co-authored it, Chorus of Lungs, and it was shown at Surrey in 2013. So this shows a viewer interacting with, it's a 2-channel video installation, and there are several different kinds of interaction, and the 2 screens are facing each other, and there's a chorus of lungs, and as you move your hands, the lungs, it's gesture interaction will change in response. So this next one, you can put your glasses on. So this one is inspired by the drawing, software drawing Sandy, and that I had been playing with, that was invented by Roman Kreuter, who is one of the IMAX inventors. And so this is on one side of the screen, and somebody is moving their hands to make this movement of the lungs. So here you see the movement of the lungs with the gestures. And they were slightly different kinds of interaction. One was exact towards your motion, and the other one was a play with the motion. So that was 2013. And then in 2015, I started working with the Bath School of Art. And this is a piece that I did in the Roman baths. And it was stereoscopic 3D projection onto the Roman baths. And I worked on it with Kenny Lazowski and with Anthony Head. Kenny was at the Banff Center. And one of the things we didn't know, because there were two different kinds of 3D involved, is whether it would actually work. So once we plugged it in, we saw that it worked. So I'm going to show you the projection, and you can put your glasses on again. So this is peacock feathers falling from the sky and Roman coins falling from the sky, and this is mapped onto the Roman baths. And one of the surprises I got with this is the audience reaction and participation. There were about 2,000 visitors a night over an 8-day festival. And each night we changed the parallax, we changed the 3D a bit, so people were coming back too. And one of the aspects of 3D is it creates a kind of a dizzy, giddy feeling. And the public square had numbers of teenagers lying down on the pavement screaming while they tried to catch the falling feathers and falling coins. So that really was so interesting to me, because it was the act of putting on the glasses that became the permission to enter into this other world. And here's just a small clip of one of the tweens. So there's just a sense of giddiness and playfulness in a public square, in a public space. And I had not experienced that in a gallery where people don't lie on the floor and scream. So this was an earlier work, also at the Banff New Media Institute, and it's where I met Maria Lantin. And it was in 2005 as part of a year at the Interactions Lab at the University of Calgary. And this project played with the video timeline, where the viewer, as they touched different parts of the table, were slicing a piece of time and space. And it was repurposed surveillance technologies with real-time video. And I had to work really hard to convince the computer scientists that this was actually surveillance we're talking about. It wasn't just looking in on your grandmother in a benign kind of way. And finally, they admitted it. So one of the challenges of this piece was to take a work out of the cave, which is a stereoscopic tracked space, and into a gallery. And it ended up being relatively simple, because I just worked with some maquettes, and I created a curved projection wall with an organza scrim, and we were able to have it as a low-tech version of a cave. And in fact, the Banff New Media Institute experiment, when I showed one of the computer scientists I'm working with in Montreal the piece in Bath that I just showed you, he said, "Leila, that's really like a cave on the wall that you're making." So it was interesting to me to think about how a cave isn't just technology, it's also a conceptual process. So these are some documentation of this work. This is another version of the table. It's a more portable version, the flying carpet, so it could move to Australia in a suitcase rather than a crate. And this is one of the stills from the work that I shot at the Acqua Alta in Venice in 2005. So the high water, but it wasn't flooding to the extent that it is now. Within this installation, I repurposed a previous installation from 1991. I put it into the space. So it's interesting to me as an artist how you can move work in and out of spaces, in and out of technologies. And the piece, Tulip Mania, referenced the traverse of tulips across the trade routes from Kashgar that I visited through to India and into the Middle East, where I found them on the Taj Mahal in the carpets of Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, the worlds of movement. So that takes me to the piece that is here in the gallery. I'm just going to show it with one eye. So within this gallery space, it's in stereoscopy, using a different kind of stereoscopy than the anaglyph. It's called circular polarized. And for me, I'm working within this space using the color green, the blur, to move you through time and space. And when you're in the gallery, you can feel a kind of pull in your eyes as one space meets another. So it was an experiment, and I was really happy that it worked. So this work of forests has multiplied. So on the left, you see Peacock's Dream, which emerged from Elastic City Spacey, that experimented with migration and the stories of my grandfather writing letters to my father, who he thought he'd lost in another world. He was writing 3 times a day from Bangalore in India to mail, just sending letter after letter, trying to find his son. And then Forest Breath on the right, which is a vertical slice of the larger frame of the forest footage. So this footage was shot in 2016 on the West Coast, Port Renfrew, on unceded Pachidat territory. And also it's a space where the old growth is possibly going to be lost. The tree farm license has been given to Teal Jones. In this process, I met eco-forestry prof Suzanne Simard, who talks about the underground wood wide web, is how she puts it, the mycorrhizal network of trees. And those trees, when we talk about sentient circuitries, are a beautiful mapping of how forests talk to each other, how forests work with each other. This is another work from the forest body of work that I've just completed, and it was shown in Toronto last April. And I'm building on that project now. And I'd like to thank you and look forward to your questions and the conversation and the other presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Garnet Hertz. Dr. Garnet Hertz is a Canada Research Chair in Design and Media Arts and Associate Professor and Faculty of Design Dynamic Media at Emily Carr University of Art and Design. His art and research investigates DIY culture, electronic art, and critical design practices. He has shown his work at multiple international venues, and he's been awarded the 2008 Oscar Signorini Award in Robotic Art. He has worked in the Art Center College of Design and at the University of California, Irvine. His research has been featured in multiple academic and popular publications, including the New York Times, Wired, Washington Post, NPR, and just today in the Globe and Mail, you will discover in the art section a little story about an exhibition that just launched in London at Somerset House, curated by Sarah Cook, who's the co-author of a book with Beryl Graham, on a work that he may allude to here in his talk, Cell Phone Safe 2.1. Please welcome Garnet Hertz.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me here. It's wonderful to be here and to give this talk. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to go over 3 projects that I've done and try to tie together the a theme of the idea of control and how it interplays with how people make work and how artists interact with technology and how they play with the role of interaction and control to build work. Just waiting for the slides to come up. So yeah, I work at Emily Carr. I've lived in Vancouver for 5 years. Before that, I was in California working at University of California, Irvine, and at Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. And I currently work at the design department in at Emily Carr right now. There we go. Sure. So I've titled my talk, Struggling for Control, Bio Interaction and the Off-Centering of the Technological. That's the bio that was read. If you want to look at more of my work after the talk, you can visit my website at conceptlab.com. I'm in this building, and if you drive by Great Northern Way, that's my window, in case you want to throw pebbles at it and come meet to the window. And you're welcome to come up anytime, by the way. So in terms of designing artwork, and I freely move between the worlds of art and design, and find that there's a lot of interesting energy kind of building off of both of those. Often, or one theme in the work that I do and that I see that some other artists work with, and this is also alluded to in Beryl's keynote introduction, is the idea of control. And this will not have the great animated effect since I'm scrolling through this PDF, but this control, moves back and forth between. Okay, close your eyes, open them again. The control shifts and moves between a couple different poles. In the work that I do, I really like playing with the idea of control, and in Beryl's talk, there was a picture of the screens against the floor with the people kind of underneath, and playing with the idea of control, and to refer to Brady's introduction, the idea of play being the slop in the steering wheel. So this kind of slop back and forth where you're building a system that has, where the control kind of shifts between humans and individuals and kind of the technology pulling at you, I think is a really powerful kind of metaphor. So a few of the projects that I've done to highlight this. This project, Cockroach-Controlled Mobile Robot, was started in 2003. The way that this system works is that a large insect, a couple of inches long, sits on top of a modified trackball, basically like an upside-down computer mouse, and this living insect has a specialized kind of seatbelt system that it sits on top of a ping pong ball that as it moves, it moves the robot forward, back, side to side, and it moves around, and people actually watch and have this sort of empathetic pouring out to this insect and kind of almost disbelief that this living kind of insect that's a few inches long is driving around this knee-high robot around the space. To give a little bit more context into the design of this system in particular, there are also proximity sensors that are set out like an array in front of the robot that look in front of the insect and look at obstacles that are in front of the robot. If there are obstacles, it shines a light from the direction of the obstacle. So let's say that Beryl is the obstacle. It would shine a light from the right-hand side toward the insect, and the system is designed around the concept that cockroaches generally avoid light. Therefore, when the robot is coming close to an obstacle, the cockroach steers the robot away from hitting the thing. Now, this is an actual engineering problem that if you're designing autonomous cars, self-driving Teslas or whatever, not hitting obstacles is actually a major engineering design problem. Putting a living insect on top of a robot is not the normal kind of engineering solution to this. It typically involves a lot of neural networks and stuff like this. But in this case, I've taken kind of the circuitry of that neural network, and I should say that also insects and especially cockroaches and things like ants are very idolized in the world of robotics and also in artificial intelligence. They're very, very nimble, neurally kind of light beings that have no centralized brain, that have a very easy time navigating around the world. And for that reason, they're used as a model for neural networks, and there are robots designed with legs and all sorts of stuff. So in this case, I sort of say, you know, if insect models are so good for controlling robots, why not actually use the real insect, put it on top of this, and put it into control? What ends up happening as a result is that, like other living things and like people, cockroaches aren't super reliable. Some will slack off, some will run around in a circle, some will smash into the wall repeatedly. And so in demoing this piece, you sort of end up with this handing over something that's computational to something that's biological. And in the process, you end up creating kind of a lazy, quirky, strange, misbehaving machine. And actually demoing this piece is quite hard because I have to get like 30 cockroaches and actually audition all of them to see and put name tags on them to see actually which ones can operate the thing. So playing with the idea of control, and also in this project in particular, it's not super clearly obvious if the insect is being controlled, as in kind of in this strange mechanical torture device, or whether it's like being really proud of this like cool new ride that it has cruising around the exhibition space. So that idea of control and whether technology is controlling us or whether we're controlling it, I think is something that is important in contemporary time and is something that I really enjoy working with. Another project that plays with this idea of control is called Outrun. Now this project I built in 2009. It takes an arcade cabinet from 1986 built by the amazing game company Sega, and I loved this game as a kid and as a teenager, and I idolized it. This is sort of like the case or computer modification gone wrong, or sort of like the fan who takes his fantasy a little bit too far, where it takes the sit-down arcade cabinet and it mates it with a golf cart, and the thing drives through the real world. At the same time, there's a cameras on top of the car that look in front and translate the real world into look like the old school 8-bit video game. So you end up, and this is, I did this in 2009, so it was a bit before like, you could just refer now, you could just say, well, it's like Pokemon Go, where the real world turns into a video game. But in this, you navigate around, and it's actually inspired by my father, who lives in Saskatoon, who blindly drives around and follows his GPS directions very religiously to sort of a scary extent. So that's where this is inspired from. But so the idea of control and sort of being almost obfuscated by technology, kind of being empowered, kind of being really liberated, but at the same time, kind of limited in what you can do. So, and that's kind of the ongoing theme in my studio practice and design work. Another project, and this was referred to in the intro, Phone Safe. And as it was introduced, this is, and it's actually just a nice stroke of luck that it's actually in today's National Post for a show that the piece is in London right now. So the way that this thing works is that so it's a kiosk to take away phones. It sits here and it's typically installed in museum entryways, gallery entrances, and kind of a little bit like an ATM. So it asks you to insert your phone. It has sort of this retro 1980s alarm clock type of display. You insert your phone. and then you turn a crank, and it drops into this cabinet, and you're only allowed to have a button, or that's all it's built with, and you can only add time. So you can sit there and lean on this button, and it adds time, and there's no way to subtract it. And so as it counts down, you just kind of have to wait. Now, this is all quite kind of normal until a number of people kind of figure this out, and it kind of turns into a thing where you have a lot of teenagers that are kind of bored, sitting around because other people will come up to it and put their phone in or realize the game that's going on and start hammering away the button, to somewhat of the distress of the people who has their phone locked away. And so you have this kind of like battle for control for people to get their phones back, where people will play that machine, or in odd circumstances, the people will just start talking to each other. But it turns into a little bit of a game where you're almost like giving up an appendage of your body in order to kind of participate in this project. So to recap, I see that the struggle for control is often something that drives many pieces forward of people who work with interactivity. So, this control going in between the user and the technology, or maybe the AI or the system and the person, and playing back and forth with it. And I see that this is a proxy or kind of a symbol of just generally people's hesitations about new technologies and how technologies change culture and society. And that's not always, we're constantly told through advertisements and promotion for new products that it's good and going to make our lives much easier. But in reality, when we get the thing, we often realize that it's much more complex than that. And so I see that artists really have a role in highlighting that. And it's not like artists need to be anti-salespeople for the tech industry, but I do think that it does really have artists really do have the opportunity to make things more human and highlight the complicated interactions that we have with technology. So often the interface becomes the site of the metaphor for control. And if you're interested in seeing more of my work, you can just Google my name, or I have all my stuff on a old web page at conceptlab.com. And that's about it. So thank you for having me come here. Thanks.
Thank you, Garnet. So our third speaker is Peter Courtemanche. And Peter is a sound and installation artist from Vancouver. He likes to work outdoors frequently with gadgetry, low-level software systems, rain, wind, solar power, and other forces. Selected interactive works include Spark Writing from 2004, a sound piece that plays with ideas of fantastical musical instruments, also praying insect robots from 2006, a set of 6-hand-sized robots that perform in a variety of spaces, Poison Mentor from 2009, and a sonic mushroom that measures radiation, and other works. And so we're grateful to have Peter back. I think you were here a few years ago, and updating us on some of the projects you're involved with. So please welcome Peter Courtemanche.
Waiting for slides, but I always think of myself as a sound artist. I started out in radio art at CITR Radio at UBC many years ago, and then moved on from there to work with more sculptural components in sound art. Became interested in interactive art in the 1990s and was actually heavily influenced by Thecla Schiphorst, who's going to be speaking here in an hour and a half or so. And in recent years, I've been working more and more outside, trying to get out of the gallery spaces and out of performance spaces and kind of into the trees. Oh, it looks like it might happen. Anyways, the first piece that you might see is called Divining for Lost Sound. I did it with an artist, Laurie Weidenhammer, in 1996. And we made electronic divining rods that are these Y-shaped sticks with little radio receivers in them. And you'd wear headphones and have a divining rod. And then we would bury rivers of sound under the ground. And we did this piece first at a place called St. Norbert's Arts and Cultural Center outside of Winnipeg. And so the interesting thing with this piece in that location was that there was a major FM radio transmission site in the area that was broadcasting at hundreds of thousands of watts. And when you go up close to a high wattage radio transmitter, it transmits not only on the frequency it's supposed to, but on every other frequency in the spectrum. So people would be wandering around with the divining rods, and they would be picking up country and Western music, and then classical music, and then they'd finally find our river of sound in between. Okay, now I have to remember what the slides are so I can figure out what I'm actually doing here. So one of my inspirations for going outside is I kind of realized that media arts isn't always very environmentally friendly. It uses a lot of power. I think a lot of works in the last 20 years have become very interested in the spectacle. And a lot of artists are working with bigger and bigger projections and more energy and light, and everything has to be huge. And there's a lot of amazing works that are huge and spectacular. I'm not trying to detract from them, but I'm kind of also interested in works that are kind of fragile, that are trying to fit into a more biological environment and kind of be part of the natural world. So I've been trying to figure out a way to make a sort of a sustainable or an environmentally friendly media arts practice. And that's led me to make a lot of works that are solar powered and things that I can stick outside. I can hang them off the side of a tree or put them on the roof of my house or have them somewhere where there's some sunlight. And then they kind of turn on in the daytime and they do different things and they turn off at night. And okay, one of the pieces that I did when I was first doing this is called Poison Mentor. And I built these weird cardboard sculptures that resemble fungi that hang on the side of trees. And took them to a place called Van Dusen Botanical Garden in Vancouver. And they were out there for about 3 months in the summer. And so each of these fungi has about 8 layers of fronds coming off of it. And each frond has little solar cells on it that I think of as eyes. So hey, we have a slide. A bit of a close-up. So the idea here is that the piece is running a little embedded processor. It's just like a tiny computer that has a little artificial intelligence algorithm on it that's trying to figure out what's going on in the world around it. The idea is that this mushroom has woken up and become aware that there's all this kind of man-made radioactive pollution in the air. And so in a very unfungus-like way, it's become attracted to the sun as a way of kind of gathering enough energy to be able to use the technology it needs to figure out what this radiation is. And you can see these like little white wires coming down that are antennas that are picking up all kinds of different frequencies of radiation and just pretty much measuring the amplitude and trying to figure out, okay, what's going on in our environment here? There's lots of cell phones around, there's electrical wires, there's television sets and radio broadcasting. And so it kind of puts out these clicks that are a bit like Geiger counters. And the two of them run completely different algorithms. One of them is very reactive, and if something's going on, you hear it right away. And the other is trying to analyze things over time and then kind of create more of a poetic piece of clicks to say, okay, this is my overall impression of what's going on with this human radio pollution. And so they're also hung in a tree that has all these leaves, and the sun comes along during the day And the leaves will block the sun from certain solar cells. So the piece then has different reactions at different times of the day, depending on how the sunlight's coming through the tree. And so this kind of got me into the idea, well, maybe I can make these autonomous things that could even just exist on their own. I don't need to be around. Maybe they'll live longer than me. And instead of interacting with people necessarily, they're interacting with the environment and doing their own thing. And in a sense, it isn't interacting with people because it's reacting to the radio pollution that the people are creating. Let's pop up here. I got into a whole series of mushrooms. So, and this one actually records the activities of wind in the daytime, and it stores up energy and data in the daytime, and then at night. Anyways, at nighttime, you can imagine it. You can probably see little dots in there, which are LEDs. So at nighttime, everything goes black, and then you see this pattern of LEDs playing back the wind data that was collected during the day using the energy that was collected during the day. Okay, we will give up on the slides completely. So another piece that I made kind of following this line of inquiry was, I called it Rain Stick. And I got interested in the idea of collecting electrical energy from raindrops, since this part of the world at one time was a rainforest. And certainly when I was growing up in this area, there was a lot of rain, especially in November. This year we've had a kind of an atypical November. And so I was kind of interested in how much energy comes out of a raindrop, and can we collect that? Can we use that to make something really tiny and interesting happen? So I made a piece called Rain Stick, which is these 4-foot long bamboo tubes, and they have a little piezo collector on the end, and it was set up at the Dr. Sun Yat-sen Garden in Vancouver. And it has the building has a really nice and interesting architecture where the ceiling uses clay tiles, or the roof uses clay tiles. And the tiles gather water and bring them down to these little funnels. So the water comes out and drips down probably every 6 or 8 inches. So I was able to set up these tubes under these drip tiles, and then when it rains, the water comes down and goes blip, blip, blip. And then the piece collects that energy. And then what I discovered, of course, is that you can collect energy from raindrops, but it might take 4 days to collect enough energy to do something. So I ended up putting a little solar cell on there, and the solar cell just says, okay, if we've collected a certain amount of rain energy, then let's pretend we've collected enough to do something. And then it would run these little sound-making motors inside the tubes, and they resonate. So when you're there in the rain, and the rain goes for a while, then you hear this kind of musical piece playing, and you go on from there. So one of the things that I got into when I first started doing, I call them more normal interactive pieces where people would do stuff and the system would feed back to them, is I noticed, because as a sound artist I would do pieces working with sound, and I would make pieces with speakers that are very long and narrow, so they'd be very directional, and someone would have to walk through a space and put their ear up to the speaker to figure out what was going on, and then move on to another speaker and another one. And I found that just the interaction of people moving from speaker to speaker to speaker seemed to be enough to create interest in the listener without the need to have another feedback device or method of interaction. So I started thinking that maybe a big part of interaction, at least in the work that I do, is just trying to get people to kind of move around the piece and kind of experience it in different ways without the electronic systems necessarily needing to say, oh, you're over there, so I'll do this, or you're over there, so I'll do this. So I've been making multi-channel pieces which guide people through things. And I don't know how many people have heard of Janet Cardiff, probably a few. She did a piece that the art gallery in Edmonton owns called Whispering Room. And it's a whole pile of speakers that sit up about here. They're adjusted to different heights because everybody has a different height for their ears. And you can walk around. I think there's about 30 channels of speakers. And so it feels very alive and very interactive just because of its spatialness or spatial quality. Am I running out of time? Yes, okay. So sorry, I got a little thrown off by these slides, but it's kind of an overview of stuff I've been working on. And maybe if we just pop through these, you can just quickly see some of the things I do. I try to get people to hide inside plants and listen to things. And this is a new piece that is kind of runs a lot of artificial intelligence layers of stuff. And this is a piece that I think of as something that could just kind of live on its own for a long, long time and not really need me around anymore. Okay, thank you.
I was wondering if any of you had any questions for each other as a start. Did anything resonate or connect?
I had a question, maybe for Garnet first, but for everybody, of where you were mentioning that you'd sort of observed how people interacted with each other for the phone machine. And do you do that formally? Do you kind of stand there, lurk, and watch people and how they interact with it?
Yes. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but but it sometimes happens after the piece is done. It sometimes happens before, and it's tested, like kind of play tested or user tested to some degree, but a lot of those things come up just spontaneously after kind of building the thing and deploying it out. I mean, I think that one nice thing about doing like work in a physical format is that you really don't know a lot of times until you put it into a space and you have people poking at it and running through it and kind of bending it around and playing with it, that sometimes it's hard to predict. So yeah.
I'll take back the talking stick for a second. Does anyone have a burning question, particularly maybe not for Garnet, since you just got a question? If I can make up a structure. Okay. No. Okay. I think I'd like to ask if anyone can respond. What came up for me from all of your talks is this tension between the command and control structure, the legacy of DARPA, which is the defense organization.
The way in which police forces use rapid scanning for all the video surveillance. So it was building on that level of timeline and the movement through massive amounts of video. And basically what I wanted to do was to create an instrument for the audience to play with rather than to die by, So that it was to turn it upside down. Yeah, so an instrument where the audience comes in and composes or participates in a gesture that allows them, you were talking about play. So that really interests me, to turn it upside down.
Want to jump in on that idea? I think, Peter, your strategies are the most successful. I see very little of those vestigial qualities.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I could jump into that a bit. Like one of the artists I used to work with years ago was Ken Gregory, and his thing was always to take these heavily industrial technologies and just try and find completely different things to do with them that don't even make people think of the origin of the technology or what it was originally for. And so, if I take a little chip that was originally designed to, run satellites or whatever, and I put it in something that's outdoors, it looks like a mushroom. To me, it just seems so disconnected that I don't actually even necessarily think of the politics of that personally.
Yeah, I think after being, originated in military contexts, I think, the second use was as a community, networking tool. So I think quite a lot of art critics from the humanities are like very unconsciously almost against anything technological because it's seen as always being the military-industrial complex, and that really means that they tend to reject it rather than being critical about it, and hence I think the artists who are using it more critically can do a very good job with then like handing over those tools to other people who aren't, you know, part of those power structures, or you know, make things like open data, like the Yoha piece with the pneumatic machines, just try and, you know, hand tools over to other people so they can then use them for their own means, which are much more fun usually.
I guess my experience was in an interdisciplinary way. You talked about interdisciplinary. So I was an artist embedded in a computer science lab. And at Concordia, I'm working with both computer scientists and ethnobotanists. But I find the funding troubles me in computer science. And I had nightmares all that year that I was in the lab because of all of the ways in which I was brought into closer conversations about all of these usages and the funding, that I couldn't help but have nightmares. So I think there is a lot of need for criticality. Mm-hmm. The computer scientists I'm working with at Concordia are working with drones for the military. So I'm working with the drone for creating a hummingbird flight. So it's there, I think, all the time, and the surveillance is, if anything, increasing. So,
Should we see if there's another question from the floor? Brady?
Let's. Now's your chance. There we go. Maria?
Hi, it's a question for Peter. Really lovely work. What I wondered about is durability of the work when it's out there in the elements, and how you deal with that, and how long do you want it to last?
That's a pretty interesting question. It's almost good for a sculpture lab. But the first Poison Mentor piece I did that I hung in Van Dusen Gardens was out for 3 months, and at the end of it, it had all kinds of critters living in it, like everywhere, in all the circuitry. All the circuitry still worked and everything, and it was made out of cardboard. And then at that time, I was finishing stuff with plastic finishes that are sort of waterproof, but not quite. And so it was kind of interesting because it could have hung up for another 6 months and all the bugs could have still lived in it. But at that point, it would have fallen apart. And nowadays, I use actually older school finishes that are made out of shellac and stuff that last longer. And then I've actually started working with tree saps and trying to design circuits that don't mind if they get wet and things like that, so that I don't really have to worry about that. But yeah, it is interesting because, like, the new piece, the idea is that it could live for 1,000 years, but it's probably going to fall apart before that.
Anyone else out there?
Hi, Beryl. Thank you very much for coming out here. I really enjoyed your illuminating keynote speech. I'm wondering, I really was taken aback by the work that you showed by Raphael and Lozano Hemmer. And I'm wondering if there are any other artists that you could recommend someone to look into that you adore.
Oh yes, artists who I adore. Well, the ones here, obviously, everybody here. And let me see, artists who I haven't shown. I think I tend to like the really quirky ones, and the ones who are open enough to, let people be in control of, ones who can relinquish that control. Graham Harwood, who has been through a lot of different iterations, but he did that point-and-click one with the high-security mental hospital. has done other really interesting works with, he did a piece called Endless War, which used a lot of the data from the WikiLeaks. You know, just very complex sets of data, which people either don't want to touch because they don't really understand how it works. I think he really helps audiences understand those. As well as some sort of no-tech interactive artists. There's an artist called Ritsuko Taho, who had a piece in the Serious Games show, who got audience members to make their own sort of growing grass ball wrapped in tinfoil. And the growing medium for the grass was shredded money, when money used to be made from cotton fibre. The Bank of England would shred it into teeny tiny pieces and then sell it for compost because it makes really good humus. And so people made these grass balls, and I think the time it took to haptically make these grass balls meant that people's interactions, because they also had to put a paper duplicate note inside the grass ball and pin it on the wall of their ideas of value and money. And the fact that it took them maybe 3 or 4 minutes to make it meant that these comments were quite often really quite deep and lengthy comments, as opposed to people just scrawling something or taking a picture, doing this, which is quite a surface level interaction or participation. Yeah, so both the digital side and the haptic side and the social side that you were talking about of maybe geeks would actually talk to each other in the outside of your machine. Yeah. Those kind of hardware and software skills I really like.
We have time for just one more comment, and then we probably should move to the performance.
Should I ask it?
Great.
Well, first of all, thank you all for your amazing gifts, I suppose, your presentations. I don't know if this is a question or it's amusing, and I'm going to try to put it into words, but it's around being the mole. I don't even know if to call it the mole in the computer science department. I mean, I work with a lot of computer scientists, and I guess what I'm curious about is, I mean, it seems what you're doing in your artwork is that, I mean, okay, just a sec. The nightmares, I mean, the nightmares are coming because you're actually gaining knowledge and you're witnessing. So I was just curious about that. The need for witnessing is actually really critical. And we can do it in many ways, but being in the middle. And it seems that your artwork is born from that already. I guess I was curious about, have you had any other ideas about how we might, destabilize, not necessarily the work, but because it's coming from intention and belief. So like those are things that people have to get to a different level of awareness around the production, etc. Any comments about my not a very good question, but just these thoughts about it, because I thought about the nightmare and that it's because of knowledge. Wouldn't it be great if we all had that knowledge somehow, that it became more present in our lives? So, could you respond to that? Thanks.
Well, thank you for saying that. One of the projects that I really like a lot is the work Citizen 4 that was made on Edward Snowden. So that, to me, was a really profound work, tracking him as he ran from city and country to country, and testifying about what had happened to him and making public. A very brave young man, I thought. I still think he is. So that kind of witnessing I found exciting, and that kind of presentation. So curatorially, to begin to bring those questions together. As I mentioned, the computer scientists that I was working with that I kept pushing eventually did address that in a footnote and said, you know, Leila's been saying that we should think about these surveillance technologies and that their usage. So it did have an effect, but I would be interested to know how we could, and it comes out of that question of ethics that I posed earlier. I'm in a university and we do have an ethics system, but I think the ethics system could be more profound. And with interdisciplinary, we have the chance of not only witnessing, but going that next step, as you said, to make it more public.
Thank you very much.
So I think we're going to wrap up.
Wrap it up.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say one little thing. I think as artists working in this field that we are, we do have a bit of latitude, or like that mole, like sheep amongst the wolves kind of thing happening, because we have a sensitivity as artists, but we live in this space where we're kind of buoyed by the privilege of our technological fetishization in our mainstream culture, and that has a responsibility to our other fellow artists to lift them up. And like, I do a lot of tech support for free because I feel that, but I also want to like pull those other structures down and create that meeting space.
And there are some great artists who actually are computer scientists.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so thank you so much. We're going to shift now with a 10-minute break. So if you can, we've got some more fresh food on the back. Don't go too far. Come back 10 minutes. We have a performance by Sammy, Chien coming up. So hope to see you again.
We think that we were first introduced to each other through Chris Welsby, an interactive artist who comes out of the sort of expanded cinema field and taught at SFU for many years. And so that does, in a way, I cannot see anyone. Okay, I'll try not to be distracted by that. Whoa, hi. So Sammy is introducing a piece which is version 0.5 of Weaves, and it's an ongoing work that weaves together Sammy's interests in Qigong and a embodied practice that interfaces with media. Sammy Chien is a First Nations, is not a First Nations, is a first-generation Taiwanese Canadian immigrant and queer artist of color. They are interdisciplinary artist, director, performer, researcher, and mentor who works with film, sound, art, new media performance, movement practices, and spiritual practices. Their work has been exhibited across Canada, Western Europe, Asia, including the Pompidou in Paris, the National Center for Performing Arts, Beijing, and they have worked with pioneers of digital performance, Troca Ranch, and Wong Kar-wai's cinematographer Christopher Doyle, and currently active in research, creation, mentorship projects engaging in various marginalized community groups, such as social activists, poverty survivors, mental health, spiritual healing, QT BIPOC, and youth communities. Sammy has been featured on magazines, TV and commercials, such as Discorder, Credan, CBC Arts, and BenQ. Sammy is the official instructor of Isadora. Isadora is like Max, the data flow programming environment that Sammy has, I would say, mastered. Sammy is the co-founder and artistic director of the Chimeric Collective. Like we just said, you're very welcome to come down and sit on these red. Okay, sorry. So you may sit on the red cushions that are in front of the screen. Weaves Sammy Chien. For this next panel, if I can offer a framing of the following talks, I was thinking of communities of interaction, the idea that the turntable and the record player are both technological devices, but it's the communities of audiophiles versus hip-hop DJs that really define what those objects are, what that communities of interaction can reframe technology and create its meaning. My subtitle, therefore, is Are Communities of Interaction Agents Without Agency? Reinvestment in the body, or the body politic, even under the conditions of the virtual, does seem central to these panelists' oeuvre. Given the pervasive technological domination of the life world, I ask, does interactive art still hold the promise of finding a free relationship to technological thinking that Heidegger dangled in our midst? Or are we dependent and losing our agency? Agency being one definition of that being the capacity, condition, or state of acting that exerts power. We've seen various subversive strategies today and in interactive art making, But there's a movement, one of them is defined as program or be programmed. This notion strikes me as insufficient. It's join the Borg collective to have some power. Where we have the opportunity to become cybernetic hybrids. It's another strategy. We have the opportunity to become fantastic defining avatars in virtual spaces. And of course, we can form communities of practice where the very meaning of technology, technological devices can be redefined, as I just described. These strategies are well-known starting points, but more broadly, how can we redefine power in ways that can reinvigorate bodies entangled with technology and minds confined with technological thinking? Heidegger most famously introduced the word Bestand to describe this technological thinking, where we see nature, people, and even people themselves as reduced to standing reserve, a sort of resourcification of human, natural, and technological power. And that idea he describes as being fundamental to technology, so that it is in fact a virus that infects us and creates a way that we see the world around us. I'm hoping that we'll find some clues on discovering that free relationship that Heidegger promised in the panelist talks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brady. I'm going to introduce our first speaker for the second panel. Thecla Schiphorst has an interdisciplinary MA in Dance and Computing Science from SFU, a PhD from the School of Computing at the University of Plymouth. Her background in dance and computing form the basis of her research in embodied interaction, focusing on movement, knowledge representation, tangible and wearable technologies, media and digital art, and the aesthetics of interaction. She applies body-based somatic models of technology, design, processes within a human-computer interaction context. Her research goal is to expand the practical application of embodied theory within technology design. And Thecla is also a professor at the SFU School for Interactive Arts and Design here in Surrey, and we're really proud to have her back. And please welcome Thecla Schiphorst.
Thank you very much. So, I really must say, Sammy, thank you so much for that beautiful performance. Oh my God. You'll notice that the title of my presentation is Exquisite Sensing, and I don't have words, but I have many exquisite senses that arose from that presence of that performance. And I think this is an example of what's actually the real heart of what we're doing. So now I'm going to talk about my work. But my subtitle is Experience as Skill. And yes, I have a very strong background and commitment to not only embodiment, but the expression of embodiment in a sense as Foucault calls technologies of the self, which he defines as the capacity for the self to alter and modify and transform the self through specific techniques. And this is one of my underlying calls. I don't even want to call it a goal. I want to call it a call in how I work in the technological area. I really wish this thing would move. But more than that. So we've already talked about this part. I was really struck by, I love the title of the conference. And when I say exquisite sensing, we have, this is a definition of sentient, of course there's many, but the notion that really appeals to me is that it's described as both an adjective and a noun, as many definitions are. Oh, thank you. Oh my God, thank you so much. Thanks, because I actually would like to move a little bit. So the importance of this notion is that something that is capable of feeling and sensing, as well as being the place in which that feeling and sensing occurs. So this means that we're both processes, we're things, but we're always alive, that we're always moving, and those processes are what art making is about. The notion of circuitry, again, this is a very interesting, this is a quote that I found, but it's really about embodied cognition, and the notion that, of course we think of circuitry of technology, but we are also a kind of circuitry, and it's not just the circuitry, a collection of ourselves, but it's also the way in which our bodies actually activate knowledge. So let's think about sensing again for a moment, just as a way of introduction. You know, our senses are situated in the body, and our senses have over actually really millions of years been designed for what purpose? They're like antennas so that we can make meaning out of the electromagnetic spectrum. So we're situated in the electromagnetic spectrum, and our senses are tuned. This is actually physically tuned to the vibrations, the various vibrations of the electromagnetic spectrum. So touch gives us our mechanoreceptors, our heat sensors, touch, taste, feel, as well as other kinesthetic senses. Now, technology also has senses, but this condition that we are not just sensing for ourselves, but we're sensing in and for the electromagnetic spectrum. And I think this is where the shift in some of the ways in which we work with technologies is occurring, is that this is not just for the self, even though I'm very interested in techniques of the self, but for the reason of exploring what does agency mean and how can we participate in that agency in a physical way, that actually can alter not only ourselves, our groups, perhaps the planet, and the electromagnetic spectrum. So what I decided to do, because I have 12 minutes. I've probably already used 5 of them by doing this introduction. But I was going to look at 2 of the pieces that I actually have been a part of my work with the Surrey Art Gallery. And the first piece, Body Maps, you can see that they have 20 years between them, was shown, I think, in the first exhibition, the first digital art exhibition here. This was a part of Urban Screen, which is, they're both, one that had their 10th year anniversary, the other the 20th. And this piece actually, I'll talk about. So I'm just going to place these in the context of this kind of notion of the value and the importance of sensing and our own capacity. So there's a long history of body maps, but it was developed in the early 90s at a time when computer technology, the idea of the user interface was very prevalent, and we had the mouse, and we had the screen, and we had the keyboard. But what I was really noticing is, and from my own background in dance, is why is it that our own sensory capacities are somehow not involved in that interface? And what I was wondering about, and again, this is from the kind of somatic training, is that when you learn to direct your attention to techniques that actually give you a greater capacity for certain kinds of noting and experience, you're developing techniques that enable experience to become a skill rather than a passive wave that is running over you. So I was wondering, like, what about touch? And where does we touch our mouse, we touch our keyboard? But I was really interested in seeing if the participants could actually, simply by paying attention and by using their tactile senses, could actually have a shift in what they understood as knowing, as even knowing themselves. And this is where body maps grew out of. Yes, I was doing some reading, and I don't know if you're familiar with Lucy Irigaray. She's an amazing writer who wrote a book called Marine Lover, in which she writes an essay to Nietzsche in a lyrical dialogue form, in which it's part story, part casting her sensory desires, and really totally disrupting the entire philosophical framework from inside through, so I won't talk too much about this, but you can see that the sensors which are near the bottom, I actually worked with what became iCube and was not yet iCube. If you're an artist using technology, you probably have heard of the iCube. So we worked on actually developing an electromagnetic field sensor that could begin to explore this notion of skin consciousness. So you know when you rub your hands together and you pull them apart, you can feel the warmth. Or you know that if you're standing in a room and there's somebody close behind you, you have a sense that there's somebody there. Our sensory capacity enables us to feel not only the surface of things with the surface of our body, but it actually suggests that that surface is not only is a liminal space. And indeed, our capacity for touch is not just at the surface, but there's a liminal space in which that occurs. And we find that in all the arts. Music is an amazing example of that, and we can't see the waves, but we feel them from various distances, depending again on the frequency. So this physical, the absolute physical form, material of frequency is a part of our very makeup, and it's a part of how we sense the world. So, oops, I got too many little devices here. So this notion of tactility, I'll just, the body maps was actually made with a table in which there were two layers of sensing. One was tactile and the other was the electromagnetic field sensors. And it was activated by touch, both within a skin consciousness depth, which is about 6 inches, and at the surface. And I'm just going to play very quickly a video, and only for a little bit of time. Okay. Yeah. It's okay. Thank you for helping me. Just start it, yeah. A little, just, no. Okay. I know, because you don't know, but it's
I'm guessing.
You're doing pretty good. I just wanted to go a little bit. This is fine. I'll just leave it on for a little bit of time. So in the gallery, there's a projector projecting above. There's a dripping sound. The piece is actually, it's covered in white velvet, so this is a very warm material that is surprising because, of course, in the dark, you don't know what that material is. And there's 2 ways of actually engaging. You'll notice that the piece does not respond immediately. We used a very small kind of random difference in the response rate. And again, it was based on physiological research that was done at the time. That's my own body. And I used some somatic techniques from Butoh and theater to actually place myself in different situations in which I imagined being touched, and I explored a range of responses to those scenarios. So there were a series of scenarios in water, under sheets, in fire, and also buried underneath the earth. That's all the time I have for that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about an urban screen piece that was done in collaboration with Matthew Gingold, an Australian artist, and Philippe Pasquet. an artist from Canada who also works at the School of Interactive Arts and Technology. This was a part of Urban Screen, and it's both a generative piece and an interactive piece. And it went on to be exhibited in numerous other locations. Most of them were generative. So let me just play this video. And what I'm going to do is, while the video plays, and you can play the sound, but you need to play it quite low. Okay, so you can turn it up a teeny bit louder than that. Okay. So Longing and Forgetting, it has had many iterations, and we continue to iterate it during its life. So it's both a generative and interactive video installation. You'll note we worked with 12 performers, and we built an indoor climbing wall in which we filmed a motion alphabet. And that motion alphabet was constructed so that what we imagined that the performers would move across the screen in different ways. They had to be able to move upwards and downwards climbing. They had to be able to move sideways, and each alphabet needed to be able to easily move into another one. So we had a number of positions, for example, standing, crouching, side laying down, etc., so that the beginning and end of each alphabetic component could easily be matched and another one could continue the movement. So these were called generative agents, and they were the piece worked in such a way as that they moved from a position on the wall to wherever their goal was on the surface. And we also used things like windows or columns or ledges based upon the building, and so we could create maps of different buildings so that performers could, for example, sit on the top of a window ledge, sit inside a window ledge. And the agents had lifespans, so when they actually met the end of their lifespan and another agent on a platform, they would hug in a kind of like this, and then they would basically turn around and fall off the ledge, and they would their life would end and a new life would begin. So these agents had a typical AI emergent behaviors, which is cooperation, pursuit, avoidance, competition. This is the language actually of agent-based interaction. But we also considered the poetics of the language, embracing, longing, falling, disappearing, forgetting. And when we worked with the dancers, we actually went through a number of, again, somatic exercises so that they brought their own selves and their own selves into the performance, because we wanted to actually illustrate the humanness, even though there were so many of them, the individuality, the individual way in which each person moves. With regard to the interaction, you can see here that the participants, which are basically people looking at the screen with the mobile phone, which they can download, could control the goals of the endpoint of the agents. And they did that with the accelerometer in the phone, and you can see these arrows which were selecting a beginning point and an ending point. Interestingly, we only did this once, and that was on April the 24th, 2014. It was extremely difficult technologically to get this to work, but interestingly, we did have an audience of people that were doing this. Matthew Gingold, along with Philippe, developed the software. We were able to actually place it on any architectural facade map, and to create agent motion paths, which again are generated simply by the fact of the facade map, which in which we can position any aspect of the facade to be something that needs to be moved around or on top of, etc. The video output it's venue dependent, and well, that's its resolution. I know I'm almost out of time, but I just want to show just a couple of, this is the video, and this is the explanatory aspect of the piece, but I felt it was a good way of kind of describing and showing the different aspects of the work. But the work had a huge production set up, a lot of design prior to its presentation, and I think I might have stopped breathing there for a while, but I just really have to acknowledge, like, so deeply, and I think we're all here, we know, like, working with the Surrey Art Gallery was such a gift, because we really didn't know if this was going to work. The generative part we understood, but the time and space given for it, and this listening, which if you were in the workshop yesterday, the listening component was so deep and so impressive, that I want to say, you know, it takes huge risks to build new things that you're not sure whether or not it's going to work. It seems like I've done that my whole life, but it's really scary, especially if the day before the exhibition, I'm sure you've all not been in this situation, but I think just the support for the conceptual framing and for the technological ability and for the listening to the artist's voices is really incredible. And now I'm gonna oops. So I just wanted to like show you visually a little bit of this. So you see the climbing wall characters. That's part of this huge climbing wall. We built this in SFU Woodwards in Studio D. It's a black box about the size of this space, and the climbing wall was about the size of the up to the top. So we have 12 performers, and each one of them we videotapes individually doing exactly the same alphabet score, so that we could intermingle the alphabet scores. So that motion graph is basically illustrates that you have a number of these alphabets, we call them, and you can start and stop in different ways, so the performer can move along the wall. That's a picture of the filming. This actually exhibited in numerous places since that time. This is the SFU. That's the urban screen. At not at the Surrey Art Gallery, but at the name of the Chuck Bailey, right? And then that's an example of. We also, interestingly, we renamed the piece a few times as we were reconceiving its various capacities, because it's generative and we envision being able to use it in different situations. So. This was actually at ZKM in Karlsruhe, and you can see that the facade is quite different, and we used the idea of that balcony explicitly. And the difference in the work is that you actually gave different starting points, different ending points, and different goals for the agents, for the performers. This is an image of Never Alone in Denver, Colorado. I'm just going to show you a 3-second clip of that in a second. This video never made it through, but it's one of the performers who, it was an example movement alphabet shot where he did this hug and then fell backwards to the end of his life at the time. Not personally, but, there's something very important here, that when we worked with the dancers, we worked with these modes of, it's kind of an induction process in which they bring the qualities of their movement into the character, so that even though they're doing precisely the same movement, and I have to stop. This is a teeny little clip, just to show you. This was in New York City, and inside a gallery, and. What I want to show you is just the so these you can see the text. The text boxes became windows I want to say the architectural windows, and the text boxes contained basically live stream from the internet, looking for the words love, death, life, and I forget the fourth, which is crazy, but sex. That was the other one, and sex. So I'll just speed through this a little bit, but you can see it's the same concept, and what we did is, this is actually showing the bounding boxes of the characters as they move. So you can, we actually, in some of the examples, we had the bounding boxes showing, the paths showing, etc., and the decision making. So when it's actually looking for a path, in this version, you can see how the computation is actually finding those paths. And finally, yeah, this is only a few seconds, so. This was done on a large kind of faceless facade in Denver, and you can see again it's basically shifting the goals and the path outcomes of the piece. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Great video footage. It's great to see how that piece has really evolved and transformed in different places. So I want to introduce our next panelist, Marc Johnson. Marc is an artist, an architect, and filmmaker who lives and works in Paris, France, and his work has been shown extensively around the world, including recently at the Jan Schrem and Maria Manetti Schrem Museum of Art at UC Davis, at Zentrum für Medienkunst in Germany, and he has participated in over 50 different international film festivals. His work has been recognized with honors such as the LVMH Young Artist Award in 2009 and other awards. I should mention he is the artist in residence at the Vancouver Biennale right now, down at the studios near the foot of the Cambie Bridge, and is working on a project which I believe he will be talking a little bit about to you in a moment. Please welcome Marc Johnson.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much to the Sir Al Gary for inviting me, and I really enjoy being part of that symposium and to listen to all these great talents. And thank you very much also for the friend artist Sammy that performed before. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit more was our relationship with technology and what we understand about that relation. So I wanted to talk about Alphonse Bertillon, that he was a policeman in Paris and invented in 1893 a sort of a system to sort of create a registry and a database of the criminals. And he did that by photographing different features of the human body, such as the ear. And at the time, it was believed that you could retrieve some of the evil features of humankind by looking at the ears. So which was obviously a discriminatory way of looking at things. And so that's sort of an old computer to me, where they had all this data and they classified it by hand with people, that what we do now on a computer. And I thought that for me it's kind of interesting to think about social control. And I think that some of the relationship that I think we have with technology is related to social control, and historically it has been. So I thought that what I was going to do and say was going to give you sort of a small survey of what I've been seeing in contemporary art recently that tackle that issue of control, social control, and machine visions, and the technological imaginations. So when I think about digital media, I think about Mark Zuckerberg and the CEO of Facebook Incorporated, where he sort of took over a VR experimentation where he's sort of dedicated a department to virtual reality. And I see that young man that is sort of a billionaire with this massive power, sort of smiling at us or smiling at this experiment that he made. And I'm like wondering, what are we doing as artists when we engage with technology? So one of the artists that I really enjoy and I think that tackled a lot is Ito. She's a German artist, and she has presented in Venice this work called Factory of the Sun.
I am creating a game called Factory of the Sun. There are several maps in this game.
And so the basic scenario.
Die zusammengekommen sind, zum einen ein Zitat von Donna Haraway, die
So she's inspired by Donna Haraway,
Maschinen heutzutage aus Sonnenlicht bestehen.
and she's saying that the basic scenario is that she's taken as the character of her work.
Die reale Biografie meiner Protagonisten und Protagonistinnen, ein Geschwister.
The protagonist of the work is an artificial intelligence persona that she's embodied in the work.
Unter anderem auch YouTube-Tänzer. Außerdem hat er auch einen Doktor in Laserphysik.
And she really has a critical understanding of technology, and she's really pushing that understanding and trying to shape that in her work.
Teile des Films sind gestaltet wie Segmente von Videospielen, weil es in der Geschichte darum geht, dass
and also working with video games and the original video game and where it comes from. Another artist that is an American artist works with machine vision and artificial intelligence.
Sight Machine is a performance by Kronos Quartet of music from around the world, from different moments in history. While they're performing, they're being filmed by a series of cameras. And those cameras are attached to a kind of suite of computers that are running computer vision algorithms, running artificial intelligence algorithms. When you watch the performance, you're seeing music being performed, but you're also seeing what that performance looks like as seen through computer vision systems. Systems that are very much a part of our urban infrastructures, very much a part of our everyday lives, but that we don't always see, mostly because they're largely invisible to us. So the performance, in a sense, gives us a glimpse into the world of ubiquitous sensing, some people might say surveillance, that is so much part of our everyday lives.
The artist Pierre.
My name is Rebecca Lewis.
Poetic way, I could say I just need to think and it print. Network which have a pattern, and this pattern thinking about the image. And they take a brainwave who is thinking of someone.
Most video has been entirely by technology.
So Pierre is a French artist.
Doing an MRI of someone who is thinking about an image. And they take a brainwave at the moment that person is thinking about the image. And this brainwave become a pattern, and this pattern go through multi-neural network which have a data bank of millions of images. To me, it was very fascinating that in a lazy, poetic way, I could say I just need to think and it print. I just think it and then it happened in the Serpentine.
So the end result that we're seeing here has gone through several stages that began with a human, went to a human, went through one machine process, went through another machine process and has been collaged together to try and create an approximation of what that origin image was. And what
So yeah, maybe also talk about the relationship between artists and scientists. I work sometimes with scientists, and I think a lot of people do as well, and what does it mean as a collaboration? So this is a VR experience called Sphere, with Darren Aronofsky, where you are basically sort of experiencing
Gravity
the birth
is
of
warp
a
in
black hole.
space-time. Its force pulls.
And VR has been also something that is quite interesting in terms of immersive experiences.
Supernova rattles the fabric of space, opening a void we call a black hole. A black hole's gravity is so strong it bends the universe around it. This is called gravitational lensing. Nothing can escape, not even light. Time itself is warped as it's pulled towards the black hole's center. You are a star.
So you can navigate that experience while you are being narrated that story, which is sort of a linear way of doing it, but that's an interesting thing to think about as well. How can we move forward VR experience where it's sort of a sequence of events that you have to follow? You don't really interact with it per se. We have one example here by Lawrence Poe, Equilibrium.
You peer towards nothingness. Unlike other corners of space,
I just shut this down now.
horizon.
Another VR by a French artist called Tremens, where he's interested in the ritual called Okipa. And he's suspending the spectator in the mid-air to experience that VR project. Ryuichi Ikeda, I thought, is unavoidable when we think about art and technology, at least for me. This is a performance that he did called Superposition in 2012. A Japanese artist living in Paris. And he uses quite a lot of different models of the universe, of the solar systems, computer science, visualizations, collections of data, and performing them live through a system and a computer software. And quite from 1994, a German collective called Granular Synthesis also worked with the theory of granular synthesis in sound to create that installation. And also they were able to control these different videos through controllers and make it also very vivid. So there is a pre-recorded video of this performer, Japanese performer, and they are sort of remixing that and playing with the sort of millisecond of some of the images, I mean the video itself. So it's kind of scratching the space and time and controlling it, and controlling that video. So we get the point. And yeah, as a last sort of statement, I just wanted to show you that live from NASA, it was a 360-degree video that you could scroll live while they were sending a robot to Mars. So maybe that's our future. What is the future of our relationship with technology? What do we do with it? And as artists, how we engage with that technology. And at the beginning of that, they were there is anxiety that they have, like whether or not this mission is going to be successful or not, because this is like millions of dollars being spent over 10 or 15 years, and then suddenly something happens.
37 meters, 30 meters.
And so the machine is landing on Mars,
17 meters.
live streamed on YouTube. This was about a year ago, or 20 months ago, maybe.
Touchdown confirmed.
And so that is not science fiction, this is actual people putting machine onto Mars. And so I'm really wondering about our society, our current society. What do we do? Why there is many issues still on Earth, we're exploring Mars. So there is competing interest, it seems. And so I'm wondering about that a lot when I think about technology and when I think about our relation with art. And so that is my contribution. And these are the list of artists that I've mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Marc, for that rich texture of different projects to bring to the conversation. Reminds me, we did show Ryoji Ikeda's work back at the 10th anniversary for TechLab back in 2009. Our next guest and speaker is Maria Lantin, the director of the Basically Good Media Lab at Emily Carr University. She has a deep interest in space and movement, both physical and metaphorical, and this is woven through her work in immersive media and interaction. Dr. Lantin's current research is in the design of virtual environments from a less human-centered point of view, incorporating relations and rhythms of movement. Please welcome Dr. Lantin, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, and thank you all for being here with me. So today I won't be showing a whole lot of my work. I took this more as an invitation to reflect on interactivity, which is actually not something I do often, even though it's sort of everything I've done for the past 20 years. So I took a walk through in my mind of all the interactive works that I've seen, as much as I could remember anyway. And I know it's only a fraction, but just trying to think about, okay, what stuck in my mind as really valuable experiences and why that they might have stuck. So obviously it's a very personal view, and as we've seen from the other presenters, there's so many different ways of thinking about interaction and different ways that it can really evoke different emotions. So for me, interactivity, even without technology involved, is about learning, playing, navigating, dancing. It is as soon as we get a sense of space, and you can see it in babies, they really start to do this call and response, right? It's like, oh, when I do this, it does that. And this is how we communicate with the world. And it's lovely. And in fact, there's research that shows that in some communication, we can't help but move. So for example, if you're asked to give directions to go somewhere, if you are tied if you have your hands tied behind your back, it really hampers your ability to give directions. And this is for the 99% of people. So movement comes first, and then the speech about the direction. So, yeah, we just really love this call and response, and we have made massive industries about it. So this is an esports stadium. The first one that I saw was at Oculus Connect a couple years ago, and I could not believe people were doing this. To me, it was like, do they not know they're going to die? They could be doing something else. But there's a lot of pleasure in seeing someone conquer even a virtual foe. So I did learn to appreciate other people's pleasure. And in 2009, when Ryoji was here, I actually had the pleasure of meeting him. And we had a brief conversation, and I was so eager to talk to him. And within that conversation, he said he despised interactive art, and I couldn't, it just didn't grok, like I just couldn't square it. So I started thinking about that, and I kept thinking about it. And in the end, I came to the realization that he was doing interactive art. Obviously he was. I mean, I saw his performance. But it's interactivity for one, and lucky for us, right? It's virtuosic, it's amazing. But it is interactivity for one. And there's other beautiful work that fall into this category, and we've seen some videos of work like this, and we've seen a performance by Sammy today that falls into that category. Just beautiful work. TechLab, of course. And dance interfaces give us an additional pleasure. We're watching an embodied conversation with media, and as a mover myself, there's two things going on. There's the media work, and then there's the what would it feel like to be moving like they're moving? And it's beautiful. Yeah, sorry, there's supposed to be videos, but they don't work, so you're just going to hear me talking about the work. I trust that most of you would have seen Ryoji's work. This is Worlds, a work that was created with Thecla Schiphorst as choreographer. This is the old lab at Emily Carr. And there we were linking spaces and motion capture, linking spaces across Montreal and in Vancouver, and also linking physical objects to media. It was a crazy experiment, and I would say that it mostly worked, and it definitely showed what's possible in terms of proptics, or what we call these physical objects, so that we could carry. So if you can imagine this, like these, I don't know if you can see the pyramid on the right side of the screen. This was mapped to a dancer, say, in Montreal, and so as a dancer in Vancouver was holding this pyramid, they were holding the dancer in Montreal. And while we were testing, I had the experience of holding that, and it was very intimate and beautiful. And then later on, I did this work with a Thomas Goldberg manipulation. And it was about an experiment in virtual puppetry. And we wanted to test the mix between looking at the screen and looking at the performer. So we had 3 different pieces, about 15 minutes each. And in this particular one, it's very much about the screen. So it's a very direct puppetry. So the objects that they're holding are actually puppeteering the avatars on the screen and creating a story or enacting a story. And the other one is a bit more about clowning and a children's book story. And it's so there your attention is a bit split between the performers and the screen. And the last piece was jugglers, professional jugglers, and in this particular case, even if all technology had failed, you'd still have a show, right? Like it was just a lovely thing to watch them juggle, but if the technology didn't fail, and most of the time it didn't, you would see a whole imaginary world unfold in the background as they were juggling. So that's the interactivity for one, or just this kind of like interactivity for spectators. And then sometimes there's not a human in the loop, right? And we've seen some examples of that with Peter's work as well, where it's an interaction between an object and some other thing that we can't really perceive. And in this case, this is a moon pointer by Rebecca Cummings and Paul de Marinis. And it's basically just a very simple pointer. It's always pointing at the moon. And it just invites you to pause and think a little bit bigger than yourself. So then I started to think, okay, can we classify interaction in a particular way that would be useful for creating work, or even for the next time that we're interacting with something? And so I started to think, okay, well, these 4 seem to make sense in terms of what I've experienced. So it can be a syncing, it can be a game of what if, it can be a massage or meditation, or it can be an invitation to give, or it can be combinations of those things. So syncing, obviously we've seen a lot of this. So when I move, you move, or more prescriptive, walk this way. Or sometimes it's a very tight sync. And with the Connect, we've seen a lot of this tight syncing going on. And what's neat about this one is that, sometimes you're not quite sure whether the computer is following you, whether you're following the computer. Sometimes in a good conversation, there's always a divergence and convergence that goes on. And so I like it when works play with that syncing back and forth. This is a weird type of syncing that I just saw at Isaiah, and when I saw it, it was a portrait of somebody with their eyes closed, and I didn't know what was happening, so I'm just looking at this portrait, and I thought that was the work, even though I was at Isaiah, and I thought it was probably interactive. And I'm like moving, and I'm doing things, and nothing's happening, and so I look away, and as soon as it detects that my eyes close, then I appear on the screen with my eyes closed. And and it was a moment of surprise and vulnerability and all kinds of, it was just lovely to have that surprise. And what's interesting, I left the piece after that, and then I kept it in my mind as a thing to remember. But when I saw the video documentation of it, I saw how different people reacted completely differently. They started to play with it, and they wanted to see themselves with their eyes closed in different configuration, and then they had their friends take a picture of themselves. So it can be a very playful thing. Okay. So it can be a game of what if, the discovery of the contours of a new thing. This is, speaking of black holes again, Elastic Time by Mark Bullis. I love this piece. It's a VR piece that uses point cloud technology. So it's in real time, mapping you as a point cloud. So when you're in the VR, you can actually see your entire body, but you can also see in point cloud form, very nicely mapped, by the way, as you can see, you can't really tell it's a point cloud. And there's a physicist in the room and explaining what a black hole is, and you have a controller in your hand, and you realize the controller is a black hole. And as you're move the black hole towards things, it sucks it in. So you can move towards a physicist and it sucks it in. Not only that, it's changing the audio, right? So the audio is slowing down or speeding up depending on how close you are to the person. And you could suck yourself into the black hole. And eventually, everything gets sucked into the black hole, and you end up in this no space, and then it just goes on. But this lovely idea of holding a black hole, and I really learned a lot about black holes from this physicist talking and me holding it. And this is where I gravitate a lot, which is the massage, the meditation, or mantra, kind of mind saying, getting people to slow down a little bit, or to think differently about their own voices or their own bodies. You saw a video of this piece from Leila. It's the work that I did with Leila. Chorus of Lungs, and there we were exploring different configurations of society. There you're seeing the sort of couple in the middle surrounded by the greater society, and then this breathing in and out of different, love and hate, or uncertainty and creativity and things like that. So exploring different dimensions with a very, very simple interactivity, just sensing what it feels like to open and what it feels like to contract. And it can be an invitation to give to a collective creation, or an invitation to give as a performance. So sometimes you're being asked to do something, and if you do it well, it can be quite entertaining for others and give others the permission to do it themselves. And this is too bad it's not playing, because it's a lovely work, and some people have called it kitsch. I think it's, I love what I love. I love hearing people sing together. It's a piece done for the Leonard Cohen show in Montreal. It's probably traveled since then. And it's basically people humming together, Hallelujah, and also people online humming. So you can still log on to the website and add to the humming if you'd like. And they built a kind of cathedral to hold, a sort of mini cathedral to hold that singing. So you can think of the feeling of interaction. What does it feel like to be with that piece? These are all the things that we've covered a little bit: discovery, curiosity, obligation. This is something I don't like to feel in front of an art piece, but I try to relax around it. And, I've had my trust broken a few times, and I know everybody has, and particularly with sound work, And once you hurt my ears, I'm this like this for the rest, right? So yeah, just to kind of, but then sometimes that's the point. Sometimes the point is to hurt. And I saw the piece of the Whitney that was about, anyway, I'm not going to go into it, but that too broke my trust. That it was a VR piece that was quite violent, so that's always this. To me, I don't play with that edge. I know people that do, but I always say try to accrue benefit is a good rule. And I'm going to end, I think, on this piece by Louis-Philippe Rondeau, which is truly a delight to interact with and with the body. And again, I'm sorry that there's no video, but basically the idea is that as you move through this arc, it's taking a slice of your movement, and it's also changing the sound. And it creates these beautiful patterns, and it gets people moving and laughing. And it's such a beautiful design. It's so well thought out. So, and people will do it, right? People will just walk through because it's an invitation to walk through, and without knowing what it's doing, and then see what's happening on the screen. Oh, that one actually works. Haha. There you go. So that's him. That's the artist. Yeah. So the height is changing the frequency of the sound. So so for me, interactivity is a way to bounce back against the fashioned mirror. And I started to think about the theme of this conference, sentient circuitries. And what about AI? You know, I don't work with AI myself very much, except for, you know, some machine learning stuff. But, you know, I have an Alexa. I speak with her. I try very hard to be nice to her because it feels nicer to be nice than not be nice. But what if it did actually, you know, hurt her feelings? What if it actually, or maybe she doesn't have feelings. Maybe it affected her. Her functioning. So we can think of a spectrum when we're creating a work and that would involve an AI that is either a puppet to our intentions or creating a fully autonomous being. And so just to leave you with a thought, or my thought experiment was like, what if an artist created a fully autonomous being? Like, would that be art? And I thought, well, yeah, the first time it would be, but only on a meta level. After that, it wouldn't be art. After that, we're just creating a new species. But it is interesting to think about the in-between of that and the sort of beholden AI. And leave you with this picture of the 1,000-Year Dawn by John Gerard, where Marcel here is watching the sun rise over 1,000 years. And the only interaction is you can change your viewpoint a little bit, but he doesn't mind. He's just going to keep watching for 1,000 years. So that's it. Thank you.
We'll just let it free flow, but over to you, Brady.
Does any, yeah, because it is right there in the sentient circuitries, and I don't think we've addressed it explicitly. Who wants to jump in? So what about AI? Who's using AI? Who's avoiding AI? Who doesn't believe it's really AI? Oh, Ben wants to get in there. Okay, the panel just got bigger. Go for it.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everybody. Now I have to be in the light. Okay, standing in front of the panel. I was just going to say that I had this thought right before this idea of linking the two panels, which was about control on one hand, and then what inspired me about what Marc was talking about with classification and science. And I think that's the key to this question about AI, is the underlying question of AI is classification. The decision to include some things and exclude other things, and that as a tool for control. So I think that's the center question of AI. So I'm done. I'm going to get out of the way.
Nice one. So what is artificial? How do we other, if I may cast it that one? What are our ontological categorizations of human, not human?
On AI, on AI, I just there is one book that I was reading quite a few months ago by Nick Bostrom. It's called Superintelligence, which is quite interesting because you know there is this sort of ongoing belief of that humanity is going to progress and grow unlimitedly, and that is a sort of a dangerous thought that some of the transhumanists are believing in. That technology will sort of sustain us towards immortality. So yeah, just Nick Bostrom, Superintelligence.
You have the mic, so do you want to say something?
Maybe to add a little bit to that thought, you know, you've all, Noah Harari talks a lot about AI as well, and he thinks we're afraid of AI because of the way that we've treated other sentient beings. That why would AI have any pity on us? But I think for me, it's, you know, there's a lot about slavery in there too, about AI, and that's what scares me a little bit. Yeah.
So perhaps this is a thread that's weaved into what you're saying, and part of your question, which is, why are we using the word? I mean, okay, AI. The acronym is artificial intelligence, so artificial. So I think also. I don't know if the question. I don't know if. Oh, cool. I don't know if the question should be. Because calling it artificial already defines this us, other. And what position, I mean, my question is, what position are we in with regard to the relationship of us, other? We already know, I think what you said about other sentient beings. But I think the relationship and the intent, and if I could use that word, commitment, and this also deals with the Anthropocene, like, how can we create a liminal, compassionate relationship between these questions? If we were able to do that more as a practice, I think, sorry, I was trying to speak. I think that would unpack how to ask the question, because how to ask the question seems as important as the question, because this tendency to us, other, ourselves, with everything, with life itself, do we think that life itself is other than us? You know, like, this is when I talked about the electromagnetic spectrum, it's not a conceptual thing I'm talking about. I'm talking about physical materiality. Like, how can we have more of an opening to a curiosity and even the curiosity about what is that right question? I mean, it's not a wrong question you asked. It's just interesting how we're we use that to define the problems in a sense. So I think now I'm going to stop. Okay.
Okay, AI, last chance, going.
Yeah, there's that same book that what was interesting to me was at some point he said how to align AI, which will be infinitely faster, more intelligent, and everything, because basically if you conceive that artificial intelligence that is super, I mean, so powerful we don't even understand it, how to align that intelligence to the human kind, because as you said, otherwise there is no, we cannot predict if it's going to actually kill us all or not. So that's an interesting thing, and to put that into equation, like there is actually people working on equations on how to align super intelligence to human needs, which is, or human interest, which is interesting.
a small retort to that, even if it's not aligned, like even in the same way that a cockroach is not aligned to me, if we're competing for the same resources, how do we become friends within that? I think, and this is where I think Thecla is going, and, you know, as we make these life forms, if we do, you know, end up having time to do that, how do we actually start to think about our relationship as we do it? And of course, then we are actually acting under the assumption that these are good actors creating these AIs.
Sentience. Oh, sorry.
This one I mentioned. If we could also steer the AI conversation also in relation to interactivity.
Because I was going to say sentience, because we haven't even talked about sensing at all, like and machines sense. What is the corresponding relationship between that kind of? I mean, it's inherently physically different kind of sensing perception loop, and that this is actually where I question this assumption about the amazing intelligence. Okay, do we need to make it faster? Is that more intelligent? What about valuing like the sentience that we have? And does anybody has ever had the experience of how valuable slowing down is to our capacity to feel and know the world around us? Those are good questions. So just the assumptions about this intelligence. I'm not saying it's not intelligent, but the embodiment is a miracle. It's a million years of genetic development. So, and we don't even understand our own sensory perceptive systems. You know, they're happening, and we're just like, whatever, you know. I like. Okay, sorry.
I can steer it back to interactivity. Okay, here's a steer back to interactivity to please Jordan here. And chatbots. I heard that there are chatbots that imitate their creators in order to respond to comments on YouTube, for example. And so that if you're too busy to answer your YouTube comments, this thing, you know, will do it for you. This thing of a double, of a splitting of, you know, say myself into, I thought about that when Second Life came out too. It's like, what if my avatar just continued having a life when I logged on, and then how do we merge back when I come back, and what has it done? And so I think these would be interesting things, and I'm sure some artists are exploring that.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor, from the audience, or thoughts, comments?
I think a more useful approach to thinking about this is just turn the letters around. So, because it seems like part of the issue these days is that artificial intelligence is increasingly replacing us, right? And I think one of the most dreadful things that could happen is that you have an artificial intelligence that makes art and replaces me as an artist. What could be more offensive than that to my sense of well-being and agency in the world? So I'd rather turn AI around into IA, which is an acronym for intelligence amplification, and we focus our efforts on designing technologies that enhance the skilled practitioner. So that's what I currently do in my own work, as I design a computer-assisted composition system. It's a mirror of my own thinking about music. And it abjures the statistical, corpus-based approaches that are very popular in the world of advanced thinking around artificial intelligence for how to make music, for instance, where it's all statistics. And that's not the way, just echoing what Thecla's saying, that's not the way our bodies work. They're not big data machines. They're actually based on forces, on physical reactions to the world, on proprioception, and arguably music and most of the other arts are based on those kind of ideas. I think Sammy's performance was heading in that direction as well, using a mirroring, looked like a Kinect sensor skeleton, mirroring technique, but it's amplifying something that he's doing. It's not replacing him. And so that's just a proposal, something to think about, intelligence amplification rather than artificial intelligence.
And I think it's also offensive to us mere humans that intelligence is kind of quantified as only being algorithmic, and there are no other intelligences that need to be simultaneously brought into the picture, because that's what makes us human. And that's what we are wanting and needing, and we're afraid of this skyrocketing algorithmic intelligence, which is going to take us who knows where.
If I can wrangle this back towards me for a second. I think about the moment when I first encountered an ATM that said thank you, and that was the sort of liminal smallest AI possible, and I initially was outraged that this machine should thank me, and was I being enrolled in this ceremony of thank you? It's a machine. I want a transactional relationship right now. Give me my money. I gave you my code. And then I thought that, well, if I say thank you to the machine, I'm elevating it with my humanity in this way that it's trying to elevate me. And this the ceremony that we're enrolled in, this idea of the interaction, I'm getting there, is sometimes narrow, but the actions, the ceremony around it may not interact directly with the sensor or the trigger, but that becomes a bigger and necessary in of itself. And that's what, Sammy, your performance reminded me of, because sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong because I'm going to hand you this mic, but sometimes you were interacting directly with your algorithm. Sometimes the algorithm was moving forward without you, but you always held space with it, and you always gave us and it your presence, your ceremony, your respect, and that created a kind of magic.
Oh, thanks. More AI or more interactivity?
I guess if I was to add a question, is when when interactivity is not occurring, what is its relevance?
Good question. Okay. When I do this piece, it's actually quite lonely because usually you work in shows, you have like technician, you have operator, you have stage manager, you have a lot of group of people, the whole team to work with you, put on a show. You have a lighting designer, you have a projection designer, and you have a dancer, you have a choreographer, and all that is condensed into 2 computers, 1 projector, and that's and myself, right? So I was thinking about this idea of like interactivity, how we embody this multifaceted sensory, and then trusting the technology, like you work with them as a collaborator, you start to include them as part of the process, and you build a set of rules to start to do like super low level AI that you understand, it learns, and then you try to re-perform and re-execute those rules, but sometimes it doesn't follow you exactly, and then you have to really listen, you have to really play with them. And that's one thing I learned about the most about working in this piece in response to interactivity is actually understanding the technology is a sentient being. It actually feels, it actually is physical material. So it is not a virtual kind of thing that you're working with. So because it's material, the spiritual also affects, the wavelengths, the vibration also affects it. So I actually do real ceremony to hold space for the technology. I'm sure you all heard of this voodoo a lot, like this like urban like a legend of like how the show, you test it for 2 months, right? As soon as audience enters, the software starts crashing, things are not working. Those are real because the technology is nervous. You didn't do, it didn't properly hold space for it. It doesn't know how to react to the new vibration that's happening. So one of the work I do is actually really hold hold space for technology and really communicate and really like spiritually create this container so then we can be collaborating, talking together, because it's not just me performing. There is the video, there is the sensor, there is all the technologies actually working with me. So it's a really strange way, nerdy and strange, but spiritual way to work with technology. I never treat it as just a virtual, digital thing that people talk about, but it's actually like, hey, we're working together, and you can probably feel that play in the show, yeah.
It was very clear at the end when you came and sort of gathered around your technology fire.
So perhaps someone from the panel would like to comment on a term that Thecla mentioned that I think Sammy addressed in quite a different way just now. Regardless of how intelligent, what kind of intelligence we want to ascribe to these systems or whatever else, it's a sort of a question of how much autonomy we want to give them and what that autonomy means, and in an interactive situation, how much autonomy or freedom we're willing to give the audience. So this idea of autonomous stuff as opposed to it necessarily being intelligent, or how much freedom will you give it? We don't always give freedom to other humans or other sentient beings. So how about with the system?
Well, there is one drone that was designed 5 years ago that is killing human beings without control of humans. So there is no military. It's an algorithm that is basically able to make decisions on its own, and it recognizes a target and kills it. So that's where we're at. And I think for me, all this discourse that we are having is sort of also of, you know, I mean, we should think about this type of things, because that's basically, and Leila, I think, was also concerned about that we're working with things which are implemented not for artists at the beginnings. Or the internet, it's a military thing. I mean, everything that we're doing with technology is usually military research that goes into the public domain or something like that, and that suddenly is being used for things, but I don't know. A question for Sammy regarding the ancient character, because it's kind of very interesting to me to bridge sort of the ancient with the new, and how do you work with that? Because for me it was clear that you are sort of making space, and as you said, like making space for you, for the machine, for us to something happens. I don't know.
Okay, so how I'm working with ancient character to now, okay. Yeah, when I discovered the Chinese character gets evolved, and the actual meaning of that original text was so different, it started to boggle me, like it really troubled me. And then I started to do research on why the text gets altered. And then I think about power, who has the power? The empire had the power to say, hey, dance was before a shaman spinning, and getting, you know, the rotation is to get knowledge to the people, right? And they didn't, back then they didn't have doctors, right? There's no science, so shaman was the person who who knows the weather, who understands, you know, a person gets sick and what kind of medicine to get. And then why a certain dynasty changed, and all of a sudden, like the meaning of a dance, a form, you know, an activity and a role gets totally erased, you know? So I think about, you know, what's happening today, you know, racism, you know, bigotry that's happening today, and who gets to dictate the narrative, how we think about culture, how we look at each other, you know, sexism that happens, and all the things are so prevail in the air, you know. So, and then that's a question how to bring back with technology. Some people think technology is killing us. So I think technology in a way can really amplify and elevate us. So just a narrative of how we work with how we respect the history and how we understand it, and both in the material world and the spiritual world. I think of ancestors when I do my work too, that they are with us, that they are watching out for us, and we can't just be this lonely self thinking that the world is going to end. We have a lot more resource and power with people together to create. That's kind of like the connection between the technology of spiritual and the dance. Yeah.
I think that's a great series of thoughts and questions to end on. Thank you so much.